Ladies, gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the ADAC SimRacing Expo 2022. I'm now on stage. It's my turn to do a little bit of work, and we're going to have a panel here, and we're going to discuss the question of, is it esports, or should it be called motorsport? So I've got four very knowledgeable people just to help me out. Representing Veloce, we've got Cam Royal. If you could come out onto the stage for me, please. Thank you. From Kramer Esports, we've got Tom Scharf. From Race Clutch, finally, Richard Arnaud is going to be here. And then from Renvelton, we've got Andrej Rappe. If you gents could take a seat. Well, first of all, how are you finding the SimRacing Expo 2022?
Yeah, I will start then, to not leave you. Pretty good, actually. Lots of new features from many manufacturers, actually, either hardware, software. I've been there in 2018 and 19, and I have to say that you can feel that after COVID, like, it has taken a new step in the business.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to be here. To be honest, I don't really have a comparison between the last years. This year is my first time ever at the ADAC SimRacing Expo, and especially not just for me, also the first time for us as a team, since our team was just raced this February or this March. So yeah, it's been a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's first time for Veloce as well, which is, I think it's a bit surprising. I think we probably should have been at a couple more previously, but yeah, it's been great. Love the environment, and it's great to see kind of, you know, LAN and in-person events happening again. So super excited to be here.
Yeah, and for us it's cool. It's also the first time on a fair, and really like it here. Representing us as a community here, and then find new chats, new people, and it's really interesting. I think it's quite professional over there in the online, and we really like it. And we'll see, like the boxes are a little bit out of scope, out of focus, and that's the only thing we would like. Little bit negative, but everything else is perfect here.
Yeah, it's massive. The size of the expo has just become massive because, yes, of course, as you mentioned there, COVID has played its part. We've not been able to have this for the last couple of years, so I guess you notice the growth a little bit more because of the absence of 2 years. And talking of growth and talking about how sim racing has got to the point now where we can fill, you know, Messe halls like this. Max Verstappen, we use him as the main example, and drivers such as Lando Norris. How do you feel them being involved, not only being involved, but being really fast? They're at the top end of sim racing as well as Formula One. How do you feel like that's helped grow sim racing?
I think it's definitely shed more light on sim racing as a I think, you know, most of us call it a sport. So yeah, it's only a positive. I think Max, you know, consistently competing in things like the Le Mans Virtual is pretty awesome, you know, especially for the sim drivers themselves. Getting to go and race against a Formula One world champion is something pretty special. So yeah, I just think it's more eyeballs, right? Which, you know, motorsport is a niche anyway, and sim racing is a niche within a niche. So the more eyes we can get on it, the better, and then hopefully we get to do more events like this.
Sure.
I think in addition to that, apart from the obvious, that there's been a huge publicity increase over the past 2 years. I think characters like Max Verstappen or Lando Norris, they add a bit of professionality to it. I mean, sim racing was professional over the past few years, but I think lots of people still see sim racing or esports in general not really as a kind of the sport they have in mind or they have in their head. And now if they see people like Max Verstappen, Formula One world champion, I think some people start to get in mind that, okay, if there's an F1 Formula drivers champion participating in sim racing, it is a real deal and it is a real sport.
Yeah, and it has been quite some times because I think Lando and Max have been like on the scene even before being Formula One driver. Like, I do remember personally racing Lando when he was only in Formula Renault times, where he was practicing. I think it was on iRacing back in the days. And I think those two also compared to, because there was some initiatives before, Like I'm thinking about Fernando Alonso, for example, who has been implicated in some ventures as well, personal-wise, through G2, I think, at the beginning, then through a full Fernando Alonso program, if I remember correctly. But Lando and Max, it's a completely new generation. And I think this is generational as well, because we do see in F1, Lando and Max being the first ones. I can mention as well Esteban that we're working with, as we're working with Alpine, who is representing officially Gran Turismo for the French area. I mean, now to go to an extent to that, you can't find a new kartman or a driver in Formula 4 which is not doing sim racing alongside his real motorsport program. And so I think in the next few years, we'll have like pretty much the whole F1 grid who are sim racers alongside being F1 drivers.
Yes, obviously the awareness is quite helpful to make the sport a little bit more public and get the idea of sim racing out there. It's not gaming, it's even more. I think there are two sides, like it really helps, the awareness is perfect. What I think we should really take care not to make sim racing only professional, like copy and paste what we do in normal motorsport and classic motorsport. And if now we start to focus only on the top-notch events and top-notch drivers, I think we'll lose or we'll pass the chance to really make sport, as a motorsport, even if it's digital or real, doesn't care anymore. For me, it's not relevant anymore. And we really have to be careful not to over-professionalize it with these guys. But obviously they help a lot.
So to follow up on that, do you feel like we've gone past the point of needing to validate sim racing? Because that's always the question is, is this real? And like, Max is racing, so that makes it valid for everybody to be doing it. It makes it more professional. Are we past that point now? Is it its own entity, and should we look to grow it in its own direction?
I think not. We did not pass it. I think we're still on a way to get rid of this gap between real racing and digital racing. I think that should be the next steps that we all should aim for. And like what we do in Renvelten is we are connecting real and digital racing. We have a racetrack where you can drive your real cars, and we focus on drivers who are not professional. In the community, we have an esports teams. Obviously, they are professional, way more professional than I am. But we want to bridge this gap again and again and again. I think we're still on a way to answer to your question. We did not pass it, but we still have to work all together to bridge this gap.
So a question to all of you really here. How many people would you say you've come across only want to be the best sim racer in the world? They're not really worried about going into real world motorsport. What percentage would you say that would be?
More and more, actually, to be honest. I can take from our experience at Race Clutch, like I'm running the community since 2013. At the beginning, you can see that drivers were all about a dream from motorsports and not having the money to basically have a career, and then extending that into sim racing, and sim racing getting more professional, getting careers in sim racing. But then afterwards, if they can connect back to the real world, we have seen that with, I can mention Igor Fraga, for example, and some others, they will do so. But now the newest generation of sim racers are like, their dream is to become a professional sim racer, not to become a professional racing driver. So I think it's starting to shift a little bit, not for all of them, but more and more actually. From my experience before, like there was more drivers wanting to get into the real car, and now I would say like it can be a 50-50 sometimes in terms of the community that we have. And what I do see from the youngest generation, I'm talking about people in between like 14 years old to 18 years old. Like they do like motorsports, and if they can have a go into the real thing, they will do it. But it's not like the end goal. The end goal is to really to build up their career like that. And I think maybe Carl can talk more about that. But Arnaud is also a very good example. Who has started racing and who has raised his own career through esports sim racing at the highest level, capitalizing on that through content. And now Arnaud is a full business itself. And if he wants to get back into motorsports, he can. So I guess like there is still bridges in between. But generational-wise, I do see more and more getting into having the dream of an esports career and not only a motorsport career.
So Cam, you're probably perfect to answer this. You've got about 7 million drivers under the banner of Veloci at this point, and you've got both sides of the story, right? James Baldwin, everyone knows his story, and then you've got, like you've just mentioned there, Jarno Opmeer. But what about the rest of, what would you say percentage-wise?
I think, to be honest, if the opportunity comes up, then obviously all these guys will want to be driving in a real car, right? But I would say that a lot of people are slowly starting to realize that it's very difficult to get a real-life drive. And sim racing, if you can do it successfully and you can do it consistently, can actually, you can reap the rewards a little bit in terms of travel and participation in different events. It might actually lead to a real-life drive at some point, which is basically the case for James, racing in Spa and GT as well. He's smashing it, and I think the point on Jarno is, Jarno, he's a phenomenal driver. Obviously, had his real life racing career, smashed it in the sim racing scene as well with F1 Esports. But his longevity and the reason why he's able to sustain where he is because of content and building a fan base, which is super important, I think, as well in getting the opportunities to do a real life drive, similar to someone like Super GT, right? With his audience on YouTube, he's able to go and race as well. So it's a fine balance, but I would definitely say that a lot of sim drivers have kind of come to that realization that they just have to maximize their sim racing career as much as they can, get as professional as they can, and then hopefully you get an opportunity in a real life car.
To be honest, I don't really know if I can name you a percentage of how many people want to get in the real car. But what I think is that lots of people don't really see what kind of commitment you have to take to become a real racing driver, or at least I think for lots of people who are very quick in the simulator, that there's still like this gap to get out of the simulator and get into the real car. There's a big commitment, and it's just not only money but time and everything. And I think there are lots of drivers, esports drivers, who are they are pleased with what they are doing. They're fine with, okay, I'm one of the fastest sim racers, but I've set my priorities in other ways. So I don't have the commitment to get into a real car. I think this always this part of the deal.
I was a bit unfair really asking for a percentage. I kind of really mean, is there a shift in people's objectives, goals? Are there less and less people going via sim racing to ultimately be in the real world, or are they just ultimately wanting to become that racing driver? I feel like when I first got into sim racing, we're still kind of in a golden generation of racing in the real world. It's kind of, I don't think racing is, with Drive to Survive, of course, Formula One's really, really popular, but it's not like, I don't know, I'm a little bit older than some of you chaps on stage here, but it used to be, I don't know, a little bit more fashionable, I guess, and a little bit more fun to be aspiring to be a GT racer, to be in Formula One. But now there are genuine opportunities in sim racing. I feel like that door being opened, less and less people are wanting to drive real cars.
To be perfectly honest, in my world, and obviously we got different worlds here.
This is perfect though, right?
Yeah. The question should be like, do I want to be a professional? I experience way more people who don't even think about being professional, but they're satisfied, as you said before, in having a community, having a hub, hanging out with friends, in inverted commas, and just be a race driver. Not asking for, may I be a professional race driver, but still, I would say 90% of these guys are aiming for driving once in a lifetime a race car, not on a professional level, never ever. And I think this is the major opportunity we have with sim racing to make the sport broader and broader, and having a lot of people being petrol heads, not professional race drivers, but petrol heads, either on a sim or in a normal race car. So my world is a little bit different there.
Yeah, no, I totally agree and join on what you said about like the professionalization of the scene. and we have to take care about amateurs definitely more in sim racing. I think it was great for the past couple of years that the scene has been more professional, so it opens them the careers into being a professional sim racer. But like I'm taking sim racing on my end as a similar example as football, because sim racing is the most affordable way of getting into racing in any way, whether it's the virtual world, but it can be open up to the real world as well, and doing like just a race, I don't know, in a go-kart or something like that. Like everything is not too expensive at the end of the day, and I think that we need to take care more about indeed that generation, to not focus not only on the professional level, but broader the community. Because at the end, as you mentioned, like not everyone wants to be the next Arnaud or the next Lewis Hamilton, for example, but they want to have a go at it. They want to see what they are doing. And I think the beauty of sim racing as a sport as well is that you have a true idea of what it takes to become professional, and also have a good enough experience to enjoy it at your own level, whether it's pros or not. And I think this is the next, I would say, challenge for the sim racing community, to connect with that, because we have started with that actually. I'm thinking more about initiative with project cars that you know very well as well on the scene. Yeah, a lot of them. And I think we missed that a little bit now. It was, I would say, a necessity, because being more professional gives more access to structures, to drivers, to teams, and so on. But now, I guess the challenge is to get back into the old roots as well, to keep a good amount of people in that can then become the next professionals as well, or just having more viewership and more people getting into it.
That's legit still the most fun I ever had in sim racing, those Project Cars days, to be honest. It's so OG. Let's talk about last year. Obviously, we had the Max and Lewis situation in the final race of Formula One, and I really want to talk about the reaction, whether you agreed with it, whether you enjoyed it, whether you didn't enjoy it. Have you had that kind of interaction, that feeling towards sim racing? Obviously, you're all a part of sim racing and real world. Have you? It's a really tough one, because have you had an event where you've cared enough to be that excited?
That was the last weekend for me. I went into the World Finals in Monaco for the Gran Turismo World Series. And a similar thing happened actually with last maneuver, last lap, deciding the Nations Cup title. And the vibe on site was very weird. Because there was, such as this situation in the real life, some stewards' decisions and stuff. Like, I mean, every person who has tried at whatever is the level, sim racing and, you know, in league racing or those kind of semi to professional leagues or championship, have had that feeling of caring enough to have, you know, the reaction and the emotion of the competition itself.
How did you react when James took the SRO?
Yeah, I mean, that was, you know, that's phenomenal for us. I mean, we tried to broadcast the 24-hour of Spa live in the Veloce HQ. You know, we were going to do a live stream for that the entire way. All the guys in the office for the first time at a boot camp. You know, that was really exciting for us. But yeah, I think it's just about the level. I think it kind of comes back to the notion of you know, how credible a lot of the competitions are, right? I think you have these new leagues starting up that are really creative, you know, like ERWC and ERL, that bring new formats to things. But in terms of, you know, naming rights and everything else, SRO is you know, it makes your ears prick up a little bit if you're into motorsport, right? So when you win these competitions, yeah, I mean, obviously it's a great feeling. I think for the drivers, you know, they put so many hours into this. You know, for them to do it and do it at that level is always awesome to see. You know, that's kind of why we do it anyway. We really enjoy those moments, and us as Veloce being kind of a content-driven brand, you know, that trying to live stream those events and make content around it is super important for us. So, you know, showcasing that passion to people that maybe aren't involved in sim racing is kind of the end goal, because then, you know, the community gets bigger and everything else. So Yeah.
At one stage, SRO GT World Challenge was new. No one knew about it, right? What does sim racing need to do to have that stance in the world of motorsport and sim racing? Where you just look at a title and you're very right and go, oh yeah, that's the one I want to be in. And there are a few sim racing championships out there like that, but in the real world of motorsport, there are so many. What does sim racing need to do?
I would re-ask first, as you said, there are heaps of formats in real racing, in classic motorsports, and at least in Germany, where I know the market a little bit, nobody knows it. So there we have the first problem. Even the classics are not known quite well, despite all the major formats. And sim racing, I think we're gonna be more personal. Like in the moment, most people don't know too much sim races. Like the old media, they don't care too much, and they are still a little bit struggling. Like, ooh, I don't know, is it a game? Is it real racing? So what we need is more personalization and having more heroes, but not only the superstar heroes, Verstappen and Cole, but make the sim racers themselves, make them a little bit more personal, make them a little bit more hero. And then we need media to focus on it and show it. Like when I'm watching sim racing at home and my stepmom comes in, she's looking on the TV like, okay, is this real racing or is it sim racing? She doesn't see the difference anymore. And that's what I want to say with that. Like if we are broadcasting it a little bit more professional, if we make it more personal, I think the acceptance will grow and the attendance and the awareness will grow for sim racing a lot. And I think, again, we all need to work together to put it on a higher level.
And I guess it comes back as well to what Liam said about content as well. Because I think in terms of communities, I'm going to take the example of SGP, where Jimmy Broadbent is behind as well, who is driving a massive community with him. At the end of the day, I don't know if it's like in the philosophy of motorsport as well, because I do find similarities personally with real racing drivers, but people don't like to expose themselves. Outside of just what they are doing, sharing a little bit more that passion. We're doing that as well at Race Clutch with a lot of content. And from the content that we see, esports is growing for the competition side, but what's bring everyone together is more like the gaming side. But the gaming side can be serious as well. Either it's the videos on iRacing, etc., like explaining more what we are doing, giving more insights from a professional or less professional level is what connects people at the end of the day. And I think it's like community related. Most championships who are now working very well or who are raising audiences are either big licenses or people who have tried to grow a community with that. I think we saw that with the professional trophy over there, with competition from VCO, for example. Like audiences are growing, maybe not as fast as we would expect sometimes, but like esports on other areas went through that path during the past 15, 20 years as well. So of course we can get some shortcuts here and there, but we're not gonna shortcut everything. And I think that growing that sense of the community, the gaming side of sim racing, is what will give us more people coming inside it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree on both of your points. And to be honest, I don't really have an idea on how to further improve it apart from the points you've mentioned. I can just name a good example. What I think really adds to sim racing and to real-world motorsports. Since we're a real racing team, racing at the Nürburgring in the NLS, Nürburgring Langstreckenserie. We also compete in the DNLS, Digital Nürburgring Langstreckenserie, and with that they've got the same commentators and everything is the same for the persons who watch the live stream. So they don't need to adapt from real racing to sim racing, and they see the same teams participate in it, and I really think that this adds to sim racing, and this also adds to how people see sim racing.
Yeah, I think pairing sim racing events with real life races goes a long way as well, because you get the traditional motorsport fans that are at the F1 races or at SRO, and when they're doing live activations like Fanatec did with their with the SRO series, you can see a hall full of sims while you're also watching real life cars go around, right? It's that kind of seamless bridge between the two. Yeah, it eases kind of everyone. I think everyone's quite curious when they see a sim. You often go and stand behind and watch what's happening, right? So the more that can happen across multiple different competitions in real life motorsport, and pairing it with sim racing, I think just really helps the transition between audiences, basically.
I really think that's what gets the people who have seen sim racing as just a game for right now, and now they say, okay, real teams participate in it, and then they watch it, and after 2 minutes they realize, this isn't real motorsports, this is sim racing.
So I guess in a way, COVID's obviously helped grow this industry massively, but it's also held it back because we've not been able to do, like you said there. That's a really interesting point.
Yeah. I think obviously everyone's kind of stuck at home during COVID, and real life motorsport wasn't actually happening, right? So a lot of digital broadcasts of virtual competitions really elevated the community, and I think we've actually kind of kept that going in terms of all the community leagues that are happening now, and a lot of the real life motorsport competitions getting more involved. But yeah, I think. Yeah, COVID definitely, it helped tremendously with viewership. So it's just about keeping it going now.
Obviously, we have championships like Rocket have now come in with their F4 championship on Race Room. You've just mentioned the partnership there, Sim Racing for the SRO. Formula One have got their Formula One esports. Do you feel it's important, obviously I had your answer already, but do you feel it's really important to indeed have these partnerships and do the same as what we're seeing in the real world? Or is there space to have more of an esports like the VTO are doing with their World Cups and their Spring Cups and the Infinity Series is coming up? Do you feel like there's space for both?
Yeah, definitely. Leave out the or. Why should we take an or? We can do and then I think the market is big enough, and the possibilities in esport. We are not stick to weekends. We are not stick to seasons and blah blah. So we can do the one and the other thing, and I think it's quite helpful, quite useful, and we should really do that.
Yeah, some would say that it becomes a little bit too diluted, though.
No, I don't know.
I'm not saying it. Don't worry.
Okay.
I'm not going to fight. I'm not going to fight you about it.
I think there's enough room for all of it.
Yeah, on that, I think like the thing is to get credibility about it, and I will come back into something that you said earlier, like to get it credible, you wanted to make it like the real thing, but the question is, does it need to be like the real thing to be credible at the end of the day? Personally, I don't think so, because like in sim racing, we have some stuff that doesn't give us the limitation of the real world. I mean, logistic-wise, I'm gonna take an example that I take in most panels that I have is like about the broadcasting side. Like in the real life, to get cameras into a car, this is an incredible challenge. We have seen drones and tries around that, but in sim racing, since it's digital, like you can do whatever you want. And I think so far we haven't explored like a tenth of the possibilities of sim racing into the entire experience. Whether you are a racer, whether you are a spectator, like there is so much more that can be done, especially with the evolution of the technology itself. Like what you can do on sims now in terms of broadcasting, in terms of replays, in terms of content creation. Like there is entire YouTube channels. I think it's called Sim Racing Videographer. Like who does those kind of clips and stuff, and who get the views. Like there is so much more to experiment, and I think we are just at the beginning of it right now. So maybe more towards esports on that side, or at least like we don't need to copy Motorsport if Motorsport is doing things the way people doesn't like to do it, or like at the end of the day, it's all about awareness and thinking as well about like how we can interest people, because as soon as you do good content, it will work, whatever is the content you are talking about.
With all these opportunities in the world of sim racing, does it now fall onto the drivers themselves to their responsibility to put themselves out there, create their own content and build their own brand?
Well, to be honest, I think there's not just one answer to it. I think it goes a long way since there are competitions which are quite different from the other, and there are drivers who just want to drive and be the fastest in the sim, and there are streamers and so on and so on. So I think there are lots of phases of sim racing, and I don't know if there's this one brand image where sim racing goes or where the driver go.
Yeah, I think it's quite subjective, right? It just depends on the driver as an individual. So like, if they want to explore the opportunity to build their own brand and make content, then by all means. I think it's not necessarily down to, well, it is down to them to have the initiative, but I think it's also down to the teams and the organizations they're working with to support them to do that, which is another big thing. A lot of these guys spend hours and hours just grinding on their tracks and everything else, and I think for us as a brand, as Veloce, like we want to try and give those opportunities to do content and kind of push the boundaries on what they're doing. But it's not for everyone, and that's perfectly fine as well. But it's just a case of realizing the position you're in as a sim driver. If you're James and you're winning SRO, or Eamon or George Boothby, it's about, hey, how can I capitalize on what I've just done, right? And how can I make a video about what we did, or how can I get on panels and talk about it, right? So it's dependent on the individual. Obviously, it'd be nice to see a lot more faces of the drivers on screen and doing content. But yeah, I think it's down to the individual for sure.
Yeah, completely. Let's talk driving standards then. Obviously, we had a massive crossover because of the pandemic, and we saw a lot of real-life drivers come over. There was a lot of controversy as well. Do you feel like driving standards is better in sim racing or in motorsports?
Sim.
You love this, don't you? I'm just poking the pot.
Yeah, just filter.
Yeah.
Easy.
Making loads of enemies.
For me, I would say, like it depends of the POV, but I would say on the sim, because from our own experiences and through COVID, like it was funny because you saw that how sim racers do approach the races and real racers, and from general public, what do you think is like, because they're sports drivers, it's a video game, there is not the element of the risks, so they are going to take more of them. And in fact, it's completely the other way around. Because sim racer, like most crashes or like sometimes some weird situation that we have seen, comes from the real life drivers because they are not sometimes taking it as the real thing, and so they try more funny stuff, I would say, in racing that they wouldn't, in real life, and that can create sometimes some bizarre situation. For being as well someone who is racing in multi-class, I think it's where this is happening the most. So I would say on an individual level, sim racers are maybe a bit more careful than real racers. Of course, it depends on each and every individual. It's just a general POV. But then in between, in terms of competition, like standards are the same and rules are pretty much the same. So there is no like a winner or loser over there.
In my opinion, there's no answer for this because we see real life championships like the DTM, where there are races.
I know what you're talking about.
where there are races where just half of the field finishes and rest is completely carnage. And then we have competitions in real life, just like at the NLS. There are races where there are close battles and there are a few scratches here and there, but in the end, every car gets to the finish line, and it's just close competition. That's how racing should be, and this goes vice versa. We see in sim racing there are events, for example, the DNLS, which was really or had really high driving standards, and on the other side, we've competed in races where it was just complete carnage, and we thought, well, what's going on here? So I don't really think that there's a clear answer for that, and I don't really know how to or how we can achieve to have the same driving standards all the way along from sim racing, real world motorsports, even in the different championships. I think there are smart enough people at the organizations who need to figure this out, how they do it. But yeah, this is thankfully not my job.
We did not figure it out till now.
Yeah, I think I don't know. It's so much easier to. Well, I say easier, but there's less consequences for crashing into someone on a sim than there are in real life, right? So, to that point, I'd probably say that the driving standards in sim are potentially a little bit worse. But at the same time, I think at the top split of all of these competitions, these guys have so much respect for each other that they try to avoid it at all costs. So, yeah, it depends on the circumstance. But I would definitely say that, in my opinion, I think sim racing driving standards definitely, I think, would be worse than real life.
A lot of races are a won in turn one in sim racing, at least in our leagues, like almost every race.
Monza.
That's like how you're supposed to race, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's good to say. Like, that's how I've been doing it for years.
Yeah, crush all the others on turn one,
sure.
go for it.
Hope your car's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Destruction Derby, was it there? Yeah. Now, to be honest, it completely depends. Like, if you're having AM guys, it's more likely that it will have a little bit of carnage in turn one or on the track, and that track limits are not respected, and so on and so on. On the other side, if you're looking to like higher level sim racing, it's all closer. So if something went wrong, it will hurt the whole field more or less. Yeah? And the guys are so focused, and they possibly try to figure out how to tweak racing, and so the standards are, for me, in the end, I think it's the question of, okay, if I smash a real race car, it may hurt me, blah, 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 all these things. So maybe I'm a little bit less aggressive. But in the end, you already mentioned like DTM last race.
It hurts your pocket.
It hurts your pocket, and the last DTM, Hockenheim, hurt some pockets.
Yeah, that was a fun.
So in the end, like, we are all racers. We do not make the big difference between digital or sim racing and real racing. I think it's the same story. One pro on this side, one contra on the next side, but I don't think that you can clearly say, oh yeah, the standards are cool, these standards are not that good.
I will say one thing, let's just use iRacing as an example. In real world, we only see one split, right? There's only one, there's not like a second split, a third split, fourth split. So we're judging, we only really should judge cleanliness really from the top split of each event if we're using iRacing as that example. Because if we want to go by Ferrari Challenge 7th split on a Wednesday, it could get really, really dodgy. But I'll go from what Moritz Lohner told me. His first ever race was at Monza, and he just said there was no space left by anybody in the real world. And he said sim racing is so much obviously safer, but in a sense of, he feels like you get left a lot more room, which, blew my mind. But then I saw the state of the side of his car after that race, which was quite incredible.
Yeah, but like in sim racing, we have these chances. Like, if I take the microcosmos Renwelten, we had this problem that really a lot of people in the league said, okay, I don't want to race anymore. It really starts to me off, and I don't want to race anymore because T1 always the same problem. Then we started in format and said, okay, we'll train starting with the field. We'll open up a server.
Something started with open wheel, that's crazy in itself.
No, training, we can do in sim racing, we can train it. We have 2-minute races, so it means one round and we again and again and repeat, and the people start to get to know it and then get a feeling for that, and the driving standards in this league, in this split, raised. And that's one of the possibilities. You shouldn't do that with real cars. Like, hey guys, have some fun, try, go for it on the start, and we'll have some spare cars, we'll do that later. So that's a great opportunity to raise standards in sim racing.
Well, it's your favorite subject, Cam. So do you think, obviously we get to see every decision made now in Formula One, whether it be GT racing, we get to see stewards' decisions. Is stewarding better in real-world motorsport or sim racing? Sink your teeth into that one.
Yeah, I think sim racing obviously is kind of basing most of their stewarding bodies off of how real-life motorsport construct them, right? So I think... Yeah, I think the stewarding in real world is further ahead, obviously, than sim racing, right? But I think with sim racing, they sometimes are a lot harsher than the real world sport will actually be. So, and I think that goes back to the old point of these guys have such respect for each other that if there is an incident, usually it is a big deal. I would love to have cameras live in LAN environments when there's live adjudication, because I would love to see kind of team managers going back and speaking to stewards and like kind of that post-race room you have on F1, right? It's the cool-down room where you kind of hear behind the scenes. I would love to see that for adjudication in sim racing. I think that would be a really cool kind of content concept that would kind of shed light on just how serious teams do take it, in these sim racing competitions. Because people do kind of go at each other's throats sometimes.
Especially in a Discord, like a Discord text chat.
It's so easy to do.
None of that would be said ever face to face.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I think it's definitely more advanced in real world. But
again, I don't think that this is about motorsport, real world motorsport, or sim racing. It just depends on the people. We've seen it in real world motorsports where decisions made. Some of the teams cannot follow, even in the NLS where we race. And the same goes for sim racing. I think you should think that in sim racing the stewards are much better because they have instant replay and all of the angles. And I don't really think that this is a problem of real world motorsports or sim racing. It just depends on the people and the organization. That's my opinion on that.
Yeah, I can agree on that end, but as Cam mentioned, I guess for participating into pretty much most of the high-end championships, like I guess everyone is trying to figure out, at least on a professional level, like what's their own instance are. I think at the moment we maybe not have enough people, I would say, in sim racing on the really top to handle this in total transparency, because there is situations where decisions could have been very different from that end, but it's really subjective as every decision made. But I think, in sim racing we're continuing to figure that out. On the more amateur level, it depends at the end of the day, such as in real life, of the individual that you have in place about that. And you have also to face the fact, as you mentioned earlier, like when you are running a league, about the fact that it's much easier to quit a sim racing championship than a real one, because the real one costs you too much to live at some point, even on a less professional level. When on sim racing, it's just buy through Discord and that's it. I think it's another challenge for us on that end. Also to build up the reputation and the people coming back into it through different seasons, etc. We have seen many leagues in sim racing completely falling apart due to stewarding issues, and people going somewhere else where it was better. So I guess it's just like time will tell on that one.
I think with sim racing as well is like the beautiful thing about it is that, especially on the stewarding side, is I think because it's so community driven, I think stewards are much more receptive to feedback, right, and constructive criticism. So to some extent, but I think the ability for sim racing to kind of adapt on the fly as opposed to going through like official bodies and boards and voting, circumstances in real life motorsport. With sim racing, it's just usually guys on a Discord server that can just have a chat, and then if they agree or they don't agree, they can go either way. But more often than not, if the community as a collective has a very good point, they're more accommodating and flexible for that, which I think is definitely a bonus of sim racing for sure.
My favorite thing is when someone gets a decision against them and then they post it somewhere, and then everyone in the comments is like, "No, you're wrong." It's so validating.
Okay, where do you experience that? Like in our little world again, it's a problem in inverted commas that you can reach out to the stewards quite easily, and even if you have hundreds of angles and all the information there, you'll never have one idea, one perspective. You'll have lots of. So it's quite hard for a steward on an AM level, like not on a professional series. But there's maybe it will be better one day because we got all the information and the ways are closer. But being steward in a community, as I might talk for some of our stewards, is quite a hard job.
And in real life, teams have to pay to put in, to get it looked at. Whereas I think sometimes in sim racing, it's kind of taken for granted how little money you have to put in to run a team into a competition or whatnot. It's not any entry fees normally for most competitions. But anyway, I'm going to wrap it up now. The last question is very, very simple. Sim racing, esports or motorsports?
I'm going to say esports myself.
I will go for esports as well.
Esports, which can become motorsport.
Nice, on the fence.
Yeah, in Germany we have Rennsport, so it's either digital or real. So I would call it racing as the most obvious translation. So it's for me one big thing.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much to all of you for your time. It's a really nice discussion there. And now we're going to go and join Matze, who will be on stage in a minute.